Hi, Jay Franklin Schultz here. Just wanted to talk with you. I think this is video number 4 in my effort to help people understand some of the issues involved in so-called police reform and in taking a look at American law enforcement here in the 21st century. Today I want to address the issue of non-law enforcement response, the social worker response, or teams that has been used with some success in parts of the country and is being explored by many, many police departments. So I want to tell you that I endorse bringing any kind of specialist to a scene that can enhance public safety and help the public. I actually visited on site in Eugene, Oregon with their Cahoots program, which has been in effect for about 30 years, where they have an alternative response if there is a call into dispatch that sounds like it doesn't have to be a police response, that it's more of a mental health crisis, whether it be homelessness or whatever else, suicidality, then that's immediately turned over to the Cahoots program and they respond. There are some that's been lauded as success, and I would certainly agree that they've been experimenting with this for a long time and honing it. And it's not something that can create a template that's immediately applicable to any department that has an interest in exploring this. So I would caution if your department is thinking about something like that, that you have to consider lots of factors, cultural background, economics, composition, demographics, current capabilities, availability of services, and many, many things that could make the success either guaranteed or not guaranteed. So with those cautions, I want to talk about a couple of things that I have a concern about. First of all, the police will always be involved in responding to mental health crisis because they're always responding to crises. The dispatcher doesn't always know, and the police officers therefore don't always know. In fact, very seldom do they really know all the factors involved in the call when they're getting there. So if they get to a call and it's solely a mental health issue, then maybe they can try to stabilize things and get somebody that can make a referral. Police have really been very successful at dealing with crisis intervention because that's what they do, whether it involves mental health or suicidality or homelessness or whatever. And most police officers feel pretty confident in dealing with those issues, and they've had training in that. And sometimes initial training, but also sometimes some specialty training. And sometimes there's crisis intervention teams in some other departments that have been doing this for years with a law enforcement response, whether aided by non-law enforcement or not. But we often have to get on the scene to find out whether there's an issue. And the availability of non-law enforcement personnel, they're not going to be staffed 24/7 except in, well, I don't know any agency that has a 24/7 immediate response availability of non-law enforcement folks, social workers. And so there's going to be lots of service gaps in terms of just the availability of having somebody that is available for immediate response. And that response won't be as immediate as it is 911, notify the officer speeds to the scene, deals with stuff. That's not ever going to happen with social workers. They're not waiting in a garage someplace, like other emergency services. So the 24-hour availability is not going to be there. So the police are still going to be responding to those kinds of calls, even if they have a protocol in place for referral. So they still need to be funded. So the idea of taking money out of the police budget and funding this non-law enforcement response it really doesn't add up mathematically. There are some alleged cost savings, but if you want to fund a non-law enforcement response, then fund it. Don't cut funding from the police that are still going to be having to respond to these calls. And one of the reasons is that the dispatch protocol for sending either non-law enforcement or law enforcement is going to be, is there violence, is there property damage, is there danger at the scene, or are there weapons involved, are there kids in the house, those kinds of things. And that's going to be a law enforcement call anyway. Even if you had an army of social workers, they're not going to go to that. And if they do go to that, they have the right and responsibility to say, no, I'm not going to handle that call. The cops are going to say, I got the call, I'm going to handle it. Because they don't have the choice to just say, no, I'm not going to deal with this, whereas non-law enforcement would. Another issue is that the referral to the criminal justice system, as clunky as it might be, is traditionally the gateway to many mental health services. So if a social worker goes, non-law enforcement response, first of all, if they see other criminal activity like stolen property or drugs or some other things that might be associated with where some of these clients live, or they may be involved in the activity. And by the way, the people with mental illness are involved in a very small percentage of violent behavior. It's not a huge overrepresentation. So sometimes we get the idea that if you've got a mental health call, then you've got somebody that's violent, and that's not necessarily true. But if somebody is violent, then the social worker is not going to be the first one through the door. It's going to be the police officer responding. So when we have these success stories of the social worker response or non-law enforcement response, they're going to be success within a select, narrow group of calls because they're not going to get the danger calls that the cops have to go to. So if somebody does threaten somebody else with a weapon or charges the officers with a weapon and there's deadly force used, that's not going to be eliminated by having a non-law enforcement response because the social worker is not going to be on that scene. And if they are, they're not going to have the capacity to deal with it if there's violence. And we'll talk about de-escalation later, but that's not the simple solution that everybody thinks that it is. So we have many challenges involved with the non-law enforcement response, the social work response. We should not be defunding police and giving that money to social programs. If those social programs need to be in place, then they need to be funded separately because the law enforcement function is going to continue at high levels of response to crisis situations, regardless of whether there's an alternative response or not. And again, remember that there's not going to be a criminal justice referral, so there's no judge that's going to be saying, all right, as a condition of not going to prison, you've got to go to rehab, or you've got to complete this program, or you've got to have this type of service. And so we're going to be missing some of the hammers, if you will, that can help people get into programs. So that's just a little glimpse about some of the issues involved with the non-law enforcement response. And again, my basic premise is I think it's great to gather every resource that we can for public safety, but there's really little justification for slicing the police budget and giving money to another operation when the funding is still going to be required for police response. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, contact me at jschultz@joelschultz.com. Leave a comment here either on Facebook or at the YouTube page, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. The personal insults and death threats I can do without, but it's part of the deal.